Gateshead and Newcastle are connected across the River Tyne by 10 bridges. The youngest is the Millennium Bridge, a slender, graceful arch, like a huge eyelid, which first opened in 2001. The oldest is the mighty High Level Bridge, a massive feat of engineering graciously opened by Queen Victoria back in 1849. It was the first bridge in the world to combine road and rail on 2 decks. It is a Grade 1 listed structure. It is iconic to every true Geordie. And yet in 2001, they allowed a load of people in hard hats and reflective jackets to start knocking 10 bells out of it.
It was built to last till the end of time, with a foot each side of the River Tyne. But the trains done rattled and the traffic rolled, and the High Level Bridge was looking over, don't knock it. Fix it. You can't scrap it. Please, you gotta fix it.
The truth is, the High Level Bridge was showing its age, all 152 years of it. So what started out as a programme of emergency repairs unexpectedly turned into one of the biggest restoration projects ever undertaken 26 metres above a major river. 7 years and £42 million later, the High Level Bridge today looks as beautiful as when it was first built. This is the story of how it was done, and believe me, it was far from easy. For a start, it's a unique structure, so it had unique problems. And as a Grade 1 listed structure, every nut and bolt had to be respected. Nothing could be altered without permission, and everything which could be preserved had to be preserved. It's made up of 6 cast and wrought iron spans sitting on masonry piers. Each span is made up of 4 parallel tied arches, supporting an upper deck and a lower deck. The decks are also supported at intervals by cast iron columns, which are joined to the arches and also prop up the upper deck. Trouble is, cast iron is a bit weak under tension. So the designer, Robert Stevenson, hung the lower deck from the upper deck using stronger, less brittle wrought iron hanging rods hidden inside the cast iron columns. It streamlined the appearance, but it created a heck of a headache for the restorers, as we'll see later. Trains run across the upper deck, whilst on the lower deck, buses and taxis run between the inner arches, and pedestrians stroll between the inner and outer arches and get a lovely view of the river. One thing that surprises everybody is that both the road and the footpath were made of timber. Of course, when the bridge was built, railway engines weighed only 1/5 of what they do today, and the road traffic was just horses and carts. Anyway, back in 2001, the idea was to just strip a bit of paint, patch a few cracks, Bob's your uncle. Well, a bit more than that, but you get the picture. Running repairs. So they began with tests, by close visual inspection, by using a clever system where a magnetic charge draws a solution of iron filings towards any defects, with ultrasonic tests which looked deep into the structure. And they even took X-rays. What all these tests indicated was enough to make even the toughest navvy turn pale. To confirm their suspicions, they removed some of the beams from a less used part of the bridge and sent them to the metallurgical lab at the University of Manchester, where they were tested to destruction. From this, they could calculate the strength of all the other beams, and then, in the interests of conservation, they rebuilt the test beams and put them back, where they wouldn't have to carry any serious weight, naturally. Meanwhile, they set about working out just how much stress the bridge had suffered over the years, by calculating every train and passenger and freight movement since 1849. A massive job, which they did with the help of the National Archives in Kew. Once the boffins and engineers knew the actual strength of the bridge and the amount of punishment it had taken over the years, they concluded, to put it into technical terms, that the bridge was knackered. But not quite as knackered as some people had feared. They now realise that with careful planning it would be possible to repair the bridge without destroying any of its historic character. But to do so would mean checking and, if needs be, fixing almost every nut and bolt, every girder and truss, the rail deck, the road deck and all the drainage, the lot, starting right away. For safety and to keep rubbish from falling into the river, they encased the bridge in a network of scaffolding and sheeting. They also put a honeycomb of scaffolding inside and floored the lot with planks. So that's 1,600 tonnes of scaffolding and enough planks to cover 2.5 football pitches. Then they got down to grit blasting away 33 layers of paint. The bridge has been painted 17 times in its life in a range of tasteful colours from green to blue to battleship grey. But these guys didn't stop there. They were going back to base metal. Up above, the trains carried on running, as Network Rail insisted that they should do right throughout the job. So most of the repairs to the upper deck had to be fitted in at weekends, when the trains could be diverted. And there was a lot to do. For a start, the longitudinal girders were cracked, so they were repaired with steel plates and glue. In many cases, they were also strengthened with an extra bracket. Back in the 1890s, they'd added some strengthening using swan's neck girders, but many of the bolts had corroded, so the contractors replaced every single one of them. They did the same for the connecting bolts between the deck posts and the columns which supported them. And in some instances, new brackets were fitted as well. Up on top, facing the worst of the elements, most of the balustrades were damaged. Wherever possible, the cracks were filled and the surface repainted, but in the worst cases, the ornate castings were replaced with perfect replicas cast locally. And that goes for these rather nice roundels, many of which were just about to fall off. And the decorative fascia panels at the tops of the columns. Now, while I've been talking about filling and gluing, you might have been thinking polyfiller, gaffer tape. Well, don't worry. The techniques these blokes used are so advanced they weren't around even 10 years ago, and some techniques were developed especially for this job. Take the gluing. Steel or carbon fibre plates are permanently fixed to the original metal using glue that has to be applied in exactly the right heat and humidity to achieve a perfect bond. And getting the right climate over the Tyne on a perishing February morning is a challenge in itself, believe me. As for the cracks, it was just like a nurse in A&E sewing up wounds. They'd drill a perfect row of holes either side of the crack, then bridge it with immensely strong stitches made of ductile, high-tensile nickel alloy. Honest. Once they're ground down and the cracks filled, you'd never know it had been mended, which pleased the conservationists, because they wanted to retain as much of the original cast iron as possible. Look at this, a complete corner cut off a column and a new one stitched on. Brilliant. Now, as I said earlier, the lower deck is hung from the upper deck by way of long wrought iron rods, at the ends of which, holding up the road, are these large plates. They're adjusted by wedges, which you can barely see because they're so badly rusted. But whilst English Heritage wanted to preserve as much of the rods as possible, they are, as I mentioned earlier, hidden inside the columns. So the contractors came up with a clever idea of performing keyhole surgery, cutting into the columns, then replacing only the damaged part of the original with a new bit. They then finished off with a new plate and a wedge at the bottom. Unfortunately, the longitudinal beams which carried the roadway were far worse, a total write-off. Don't worry, they're still in place, and they've been repaired and painted, but they no longer carry any weight. Instead, a system of over and under beams was built alongside each original beam, connected by new steel cross girders. To keep the bridge stable as work progressed, they had to be installed in an exact sequence. Below the roadway, the ends of the main arches are connected by wrought iron chains to stop them spreading apart. Fortunately, they were in reasonable condition, and wherever there was corrosion, it could be repaired with steel plates. Finally, the entire chain was sealed to prevent water damage in future. In fact, rainwater has always been one of the bridge's worst enemies, so dealing with drainage has been a major part of the work. On the rail deck, they had to dig out the ballast from one of the tracks, to get to the drainage channels and replace every one of them in stages at the weekends. On the road deck, drainage repairs proved even more tricky because the drains were hidden inside the masonry piers and there was no way of getting at them. After a lot of head scratching and consultation, it was decided the neatest and most effective solution was to fit cast iron downpipes on the outside of each pier, which were attached by blokes on ropes. Sooner them than me. Everybody got very excited when it came to laying the timbers for the road, because it meant the job was almost complete. They used massive great slabs of hardwood, way stronger than the original timbers. It was like laying a giant parquet floor, each piece cut to fit, and this timber is harder to cut or drill than concrete. Yeah, they knew it would fit really. In went the drainage gullies alongside the road, and then large concrete curbs to which they would attach crash barriers to protect the columns from accidental traffic damage. The timbers were thoroughly waterproofed, and then a road was laid just like any other modern road. Meanwhile, the footpaths were getting a similar treatment, with the additional safety feature of rolling an anti-slip pattern into the surface while it was still setting. Underneath each span, back in the 1950s, they'd fitted inspection gantries, which were now in a pretty poor state. So they would lower down to the river and floated away for restoration. The conservationists insisted they were painted grey, so they'd stand out as a later addition. And when these huge gantries were winched back up and reinstalled, they ran absolutely smoothly again. You still wouldn't get me up in one, no, but... Finally, a few items for all collectors of fascinating facts. First, the paintwork is now restored to its original cream colour of 1849. In all, they sprayed on 5 coats. That's 75,000 litres. So it shouldn't need a lick of paint for another 25 years. They took down all the old gas lamps and converted them to electricity. And while they were cleaning them, they found some really lovely patterns hidden under the layers of paint. Just like they did on the handrails. And they cast replacement lamp bases for the completely worn-out originals on the rail deck. There's so much more I could tell you. It's been a massive job and a challenging job. A job full of headaches and heartaches, calling for traditional craft skills alongside the very latest technology. But what has it meant to the blokes who put in the graft?
This is the most challenging thing I've ever came across.
Really, when we first come on, the paint, just looking at the paintwork, it looked in such a state until they started to blast it, and you've seen all the workmanship, i.e. The lampposts and stuff like that. Some of the features that were on the lampposts, just unbelievable.
It gives you a new insight in how the jobs were made, rivets and everything, you know what I mean? We weren't used to riveting and everything. And looking back, how good they were in them days,
It's like a jigsaw. You put 90% of the pieces together and you can't really see the picture. Then all of a sudden you just put 1 or 2 pieces in and you can just see the whole project come together. It's been fantastic.
I think the most thrilling one for me was the last timber when I went in on the road. I can honestly say I had the lump on my throat when I actually went in.
We've all worked as a great team. It's just been really good. One of the best experiences I've had.
Well, they've been on here for 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 years. They've all did their contribution, and the end product wouldn't be the same without all the contribution from the lads.
The workmanship's been spot on, all the lads have been spot on, crack's been good. I really enjoyed the job, and it'll be sad to see it come to an end.
I'll miss the camaraderie of the workforce, who have taken a pride in working on such a lovely structure.
There's been some good men on here. We've worked as a good team, and it'll be sad when the job's finished when we part our ways.
At its peak, 30 managers and 160 operatives were working 24 hours a day, 12 days a fortnight in all weathers. Stevenson and Harrison may not be around to shake the hands of their successors, but I bet they would if they could. The owners, Network Rail, the conservation teams of English Heritage, Newcastle Council and Gateshead Council, the boffins at the University of Manchester and the National Archives. the Railway Heritage Trust, and the many skilled metal workers of the North East. And above all, the engineers, Mott, MacDonald, and the contractors, May Gurney. At last, there they all were, gathering for the grand reopening. Everybody's representative speaking fine words about this fine structure. But amidst the celebrations and the hoopla, the historic costumes and the vintage vehicles making the first trip across the restored road deck, there was a stirring deep in the heart of every Geordie, and a small but persistent voice in his ear. It said, "Thank you. This mighty structure is at last as beautiful as when it was first built. But it's taken 7 years, so if you don't mind, we'd like our bridge back now."